But thanks so much for joining. I'm Steve Lamar. I'm the founder of Promo Prep, which is a tool for marketers for being able to plan their marketing campaigns and promotions better. It's really a kind of an intuitive marketing calendar. But I've been digging into GA4. We actually have a connector to Google Analytics that pulls revenue and things into the calendar. And so we got to learn a lot about GA4 and how that's going to impact things. And so I've been diving into that. But also, I'm a user of Google Analytics. I've been using it since it came out and love it for the most part, but not loving the GA4 thing, I think, as most people are finding. So really, I was hoping this would be a good time to be able to just share what I'm learning from it. And hopefully, I've done a lot of analytics in the past. I've seen some folks from Merge, Blue Moon. I was a web analyst there. I'm still doing some work with them a little bit. So yeah, it's a lot of fun digging into this stuff. But let me get started here. See if I can. Great. Okay. That looks like that's working. All right. So what's going on, Google? Why are they forcing this on us? We'll go into that a little bit, but really kind of the agenda is going through the fundamental differences of GA4 versus Universal Analytics. There's a lot of differences. I'm going to get into the reporting and the UI a bit as well, so we can walk through that. And then also how to set up GA4. I'll do that as well. And I forgot to mention, I'll just repeat it again. This is being recorded. I'll send the replay out. If you have questions, instead of using the chat, use the ask a question, because I'm not going to be able to keep track of any questions coming through. So use that ask a question button on there if you have questions, and I'll pause in a few to answer questions. So getting into it, why is Google doing this, right? It's kind of frustrating from marketing standpoint. We're all used to what we were used to. And it's a big change. Not only is it a big change for being able to understand the reporting and the data coming through, but also there's efforts that have to be made to actually switch over. But really, Google Analytics has been around for 20 years-ish, right? Since 2005. It's an older technology, really. If you think about when it was developed, really there weren't really web apps, right, or mobile apps. And so everything has changed, and Google Analytics, the current version, Universal Analytics, and sorry, I'll use Universal Analytics and GA4. So Universal Analytics is kind of the current version. It's all based on a page view, and a mobile app doesn't actually have a page view, right? So there's just some nuances there. As the web is moving away from cookies and its reliance on cookies, Google Analytics is going to get better at being able to kind of fill the gaps in with machine learning with GA4. So that's part of the reason as well. Plus, there's better tracking across apps and web. So if you have like a web app and you've got a Marcom or a website, like for Promo Prep, we've got our marketing site, we've got our app on a separate domain. Being able to track traffic across the app and the web is a lot easier in GA4. GA4, the way it's designed, works better in apps as well. And then also more accurate reporting because it's all event-based. I mean, I'll get into that a little bit. So there's several reasons why. I know we're all resisting it. I have been as well. And quite honestly, I haven't really dove into this until about 4 weeks ago or so, till I really made the announcement. So it's a big change for all of us. But looking at the differences between Universal Analytics and GA4. So Universal Analytics, well, both systems are based on users, right? And both have sessions. Sessions are defined a little differently in both systems, but we both have a session, right? So you go to a site, you hit the site, and then in Universal Analytics, a page view hit occurs, and that starts your session. But in Universal Analytics, that's the only thing that happens out of the box are these page views, which are these hits. And so a page view occurs, and then that gets tracked, and it pushes the data back into GA, and you track a session starting, you get your time on site and your bounce rates and all those things. But there's only that one hit that occurs each time someone hits a page. And so out of the box, that's the only thing that happens. So it's pretty simplistic. GA4 is different in that you still have these sessions, but inside the session, you have events. And events are basically things like watching a video, clicking on a button, scrolling on a page. All of these things are tracked and pushed into GA, some of them automatically. Where in universal analytics, in order for those things to happen and track those things, you had to actually set it up to do that and push it in the GA. So some very, very fundamental differences in terms of how it's tracking the data. So looking at, looking at the sessions and how a session is defined. And they're defined a little differently in universal analytics versus GA4. So again, if you go to a website, your session starts when you hit the site and a page view occurs, right? And then a session will stop if you close your browser or if you're inactive for 30 minutes. Okay, so after 30 minutes of inactivity, your session ends. And that's still true in GA4. But the difference with GA4 is your session won't restart if your source of traffic changes. And what that means is in universal analytics, if let's say I go to a shopping site, I'm going to go check out. And right before I go check out, I go to an affiliate site. I go find a coupon. I click on the coupon site, and it redirects me back to the site I was on, the shopping site. Your session will actually change, and because the source of the traffic changed. So the affiliate site is now going to get credit for that traffic because it's a brand new session. And then I go check out, and all of a sudden the affiliate site gets traffic or gets credit versus whatever drove me to the site before that. And so in universal analytics, that's how that happens. In GA4, that doesn't happen, right? So your session will persist even if that source of traffic changes. So in that scenario, if you go to an affiliate site, let's say you come in on paid search, you're ready to check out, you go to affiliate, you click and redirects you back. The source of traffic won't change in GA4. It'll actually add a new source of traffic to your session, but it won't change it. Okay, so that's a pretty big distinction. And also one other kind of weird thing is like your session actually changes in the middle of the night. So at like midnight, if you happen to be browsing at midnight, your session will break and restart if you cross over days in universal analytics. In GA4, it doesn't anymore. So because of this, the number of sessions in GA4 are actually going to be lower than in universal. So you can't actually compare the two systems and say, hey, we have this many sessions in universal and we have this many in GA4. Why aren't they lining up? Just because fundamentally sessions are tracked a little differently. Great. And then looking at events and event tracking. So all of GA4 is event triggered. So when someone hits a website, and a start session event is triggered, and a page view session is triggered. So those are automated. And there's other automations that happen as well that didn't happen in universal analytics. So I've got this little screen view video going. These are the kind of actions that are now being tracked automatically. So as a screen is scrolled up and down, if you hit 90% of the page, it will then fire a page scroll. If you click on a link that takes you off site, that'll track automatically. If you have on a search bar on your site, like you're an e-com or a blog or something, you can do searches, that will track automatically. If you watch a video, it'll track when you play it, when you pause it, how long you're watching it. So that's pretty cool. And then if you have ways to download files on your site, it'll track that automatically as well. So out of the box, GA4 is really focused on these different events, but the benefit is we've got now the ability to see more engagement types of things. We're not just getting a page view, we're actually now understanding better about engagement. And so that's really what GA4 is really focused on, is engagement. Now, in universal analytics, we could have captured all these things, and I've set up a lot of sites that do this, but you have to actually go and configure it. In GA4, the things listed here and some others do that automatically. Channels. Okay, so this is a big one. We as marketers love our channels, right? We really want to know what's driving traffic to the site. What are they doing? Are conversions happening based on what channels and things like that? So fundamentally, Google's really changed how channels are being tracked. In universal analytics, you had complete control over your channels. You could create new you could create new channels. You could delete channels. You could change the rules of how the source of traffic gets added to channels. So there was a lot of configuration you can do. That's no longer with GA4. The benefit is GA4 is giving you more default channels than it did before, but you can't change it. You can't adjust it at all. And so you can see here things like mobile push notifications, SMS, paid social. I mean, a lot of these are new, and so there's a lot more to work with, but you have to work inside of these. And so it's super critical to make sure that your UTM parameters, as you add, when you're setting up different URLs, like if you're running ads on Facebook or in your emails and things like that, you've got to make sure that your UTM parameters are dead on to what the rules are, or they're not going to fall into the channels properly. And that's always been the case, but you could kind of change it around and adjust the rules in Universal to make it match. Now you can't. And so there are some guidelines here. I pulled out 2 of the rules here. And so for instance, you'd have to fall into the email channel, your source, so like your UTM source would have to be email, or your medium would have to be email, or any of these combinations of that. And then paid social, for instance, Google's going to have a list of social sites, and we're familiar with most of them, you know, TikTok and LinkedIn and Facebook and things. There's a few other kind of random ones you wouldn't necessarily think are social, like Reddit and Quora and things like that. But Google, if the source is coming from a social site and your medium includes CP, it equals PPC, or it starts with paid, it'll bucket that into paid social. But you have to follow these rules in order to do it, or your traffic coming over is going to fall into kind of an undefined bucket, or it might get mixed into a different bucket. So you just got to make sure these are kind of squeaky clean. There's a few tools I'll actually show you at the end here to talk about how to make sure your UTM parameters are set up properly. But that's critical here, and a big difference in GA4. Okay, bounce rates are gone. So no more bounce rates in GA4. This is kind of a big one because I think a lot of folks were used to bounce rate and using that as a measure for how well our pages are performing. But really, it's kind of a false measure in a way. If you think about if someone comes to a blog post, right, they're doing research and they do a search, they go to the blog and they got what they needed and they leave. Right? If they didn't do anything else, they just viewed that one page and they didn't go to another page, they're not triggering another hit like watching a video or doing anything else, that's a bounce. And from our standpoint, we're like, this page must not be performing well because it bounced. It has a high bounce rate. But that's not necessarily the case. So Google's actually redone how they track the session, and it's all about engagement. So you'll see in the reporting, there's a ton of information about engaged session, engagement rate, engaged users, engagement time, all that's now built in. And the way that an engaged session is measured is based on the user has been on the page for 10 seconds or more, or they've viewed more than one page, or they've had some sort of conversion event. So it's not now, and 10 seconds isn't a very long threshold. So you don't have bounces, but now you have engaged sessions. That means they've been on the site for 10 seconds or more. You can adjust that. So if you have a page or so if your site, you want to adjust that, you can go all the way up to 60 seconds where you can change that engagement rate where it actually triggers an engaged session. But very different kind of way of thinking about this. So as you get in there and start seeing the reporting, you'll see engagement is pretty prominent. Then we got attribution, right? Everybody loves attribution in marketing. We really want to make sure we know what channels are getting credit for the traffic that's coming to the site and how they're converting. So taking a step back in universal analytics and how that was working, that was all based on last click non-direct, which means the source of the traffic, the last source of the traffic that came through when someone clicked on something, it gets credit for whatever converts. So if it's a form fill, if it's a purchase, whatever, that conversion event is going to go and give the credit is going to be given to the last channel that drove that traffic. So there's a couple examples here. So let's say, a month ago you came from display, you saw this site, then you visited back on social, then you did a search on paid search and came through, and then you signed up for their emails and you clicked through on their email. Well, let's say I convert and I make a purchase on this email click. None of these other channels are going to get credit except for email in this last click model. And similar in a last click non-direct, which is kind of the same thing, we've got display, social, paid search, and then they come direct. Well, paid search is actually going to get credit because the direct doesn't get credit. But this is the last click model. And so Universal Analytics 100% uses this. GA4 actually doesn't for the most part. It's now using a data-driven model. And the data-driven model is basically a way to, with machine learning, it identifies how the channel and the traffic from that channel influenced the conversion. And so you may have in these scenarios, let's say display happened like a month ago, right? And then paid search just happened today. And then they click through an email today as well. Google may give more credit for paid search and email than it will for display, because display, it definitely had some influence because that was the first interaction that there was, but maybe not as much as paid search or email because that was kind of more on the closing side of actually making the conversion happen. So, I can't get into the details of how they're doing it, but basically it's all data driven, machine learning driven and data driven that way. So very different model. You'll notice here, I've got a screenshot from GA4's UI where you can actually do some comparisons to see where you have your last click model and your data-driven model. And on the left-hand side, so in this case, like organic's going to get more credit in the last click model, but less credit, less revenue in a data-driven model. And so every single conversion could have a different influence of different channels based on the behavior of the user. And one thing to note, if your site doesn't get a lot of traffic or Google doesn't have enough data, it'll default back to the last click model, and they call it cross-channel last click now. They'll default back to that if they don't have enough for data-driven. So last click is still being used, but not as much as kind of more focused on the data-driven. Okay. Now looking at the events you must set up, right? So I talked about the automated events. If you want to track things like, are people signing up? Are they making a purchase? Are they adding things to cart? Are you generating a lead somehow? Are they clicking a login button or logging into an app? None of these are going to be automatically tracked. You can track all these and you should track all of these, but it's not automated. So this is kind of the nuance of switching over to GA4, where it can get more complicated, because if you don't get these set up, it's not going to track it. So you definitely need to get working on getting those set up, but none of this is automated. But you can and should track all these types of things. And then looking at conversions, so in Universal GA, it used to be called goals. Now they're called conversions. You basically can set a conversion off of any event that comes in. So here we got things like page views, session starts, scrolling, login. In this case, we just want sign up to be our conversion. So we toggle that one on. That becomes now the conversion. And you can actually create a lot of different events that will then be counted as a conversion if you'd like. There's ways to kind of configure that. So there's lots of, in Universal Analytics, you can really finitely create different conversions or goals, and you can kind of do the same thing in GA4. So we're not losing that. It's just a different interface and a different way to do it. Great, so I'm gonna pause a second. That's kind of the first part of like the fundamental differences. If you have questions, I see there's a lot. I'm going to go to the ask questions real quick. Okay. Some of these questions I have no idea. Why is it called GA4? I don't know. Let's see. 1, 2. This is actually the 4th iteration because they were Urchin. Then there was another one in between them. Then they switched to Universal. So it's the 4th iteration. I think it's just a versioning number. Will it result in less direct, none, and not set? I think you're still going to get a decent amount of direct traffic in there. That really shouldn't change. Direct just means that Google doesn't know the source of the traffic. So you should probably see a similar amount of direct. I can't imagine that's going to change too much. Is there a full list of the new channel rules available? There absolutely is. Just do a Google search for GA4 channel rules, and there's a huge list similar to what I had in the presentation. It's kind of complicated. They use a lot of regex to kind of tell you what the rules are and stuff. I'll show you a tool that I've got that will kind of help with that. So I'll get into that a little bit. Can the attribution influence percent be customized for your own defaults? Or is it always? No, it's always going to be machine learning. You can turn it off. You can actually switch from data driven to last click. So all your reports are last click, or there's a couple other models you can switch to. And you can interchange that. You can kind of turn it on and off if you want. But if you're on data driven, it's data driven. There's nothing you can do there. What's enough data for data-driven attribution? I have no idea. Sorry. It's got to be a lot, right? If you think about how much data is needed to really make a proper estimate on behavior, they've got to have enough data backed up to be able to understand how to predict behavior or understand behavior. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer on that. What about conversion dollar values? Corey, I'm not. I think you're asking, can you assign a value to the conversion? I think you can. I don't know 100%. I'm gonna have to look that. I don't know for sure. And then have you tried converting or using Google Ads with UA goals? I have not played with that much. Sorry, I don't have a good answer there. And then do conversions have a value? I think that was your question. I don't know. I haven't looked in that too much. Like you can assign a value, a conversion value in Universal. I have not seen that, so I'll have to play around with that a little bit. Okay, so I think I answered most of the questions. If I didn't, please re-ask it. I'm going to jump into the UI now. Show you a little bit about that. If you haven't been in here before, I'm in so Google has a demo account you can access, so anybody can get access to this. Just do a quick search on I don't know, Google Analytics demo account. You can connect this to your own login and then get all this data, which is kind of cool. So you can see everything all the reports and stuff. So you can see here, everything's more streamlined. So you've got more it's card based, and you have like all these insights and things that Google's pulling in. And then you've got kind of streamlined menus and things like that. So getting into the reports, this is probably where you're going to spend most of your time. But you'll notice that there's just not as much of it. So there's three main collections, as they're called. So you have acquisition. So where's the traffic coming from? Engagement. What are they doing when they get to your site or app? And then monetization. Are you making money? So they break down in three different categories here, or collections. And then inside of these, you've got different reports. So if I jump into this traffic acquisition point report, we've got all the different channels. So we've got direct, organic, display, all those channels here. And then you've got your users, your sessions, and you can see things like engaged sessions, and then all the way through to your conversion information. So kind of similar to the Universal stuff where you have that information there. You could add one more kind of secondary dimension here as well, but that's about it. And then you've got things like you can look at all the different events, right? So all the events that are firing, and then things like what conversions are happening. So it's a cleaner interface for sure, which is nice. And actually, let me jump to the ecom. You've got ecom purchases, so kind of similar there. So you've got like your item names and things like that. How are items being performed or products performing? So it's very much cleaner. And the cool thing is, like, this is a big benefit. I'm going to jump over to a demo account that I have control over. There is this, because I can't do it in the GA demo, but there's a library, and you can actually change all of this to anything you want. So right now I removed the monetization collection because I don't need that. And I've got acquisition and engagement. And now you have in this library, you can come and either delete things, you can add new reports. So all these are the reports that are showing up over here. So you can see user acquisitions here, traffic acquisitions here. I can come in here, I can change this, I can delete things, I can add new. So you've got a lot of control over what you see, which is kind of nice because I think in the universal analytics now, I mean, I tended to go to like 2 or 3 reports on a regular basis and maybe some others much more irregularly. And it became really messy and noisy. So this does give you the ability to have a more streamlined view. Cool. Then we get into, there's this explore section. So Google in Universal Analytics, you have custom reports you can create. They're kind of a little clunky and not very useful. This is super cool. Like you've got a lot of visualizations you can build. So you can create like funnels. So if you have an e-com, you can create like your funnel from someone going through the checkout flow. You can do things like that. Like you've got these path exploration reports you can create so you can see how people are navigating through your website. And Google had some of those reports, but you couldn't really customize them the way you can on this. So this exploration section gives you a ton of ways of visualizing and creating new types of reports, which is pretty cool. Then we have this advertising section. I'm not quite sure why they call it advertising. It's attribution, actually. This is where I pulled that report out in the presentation, where we've got the model comparisons. So you can compare last click to your data driven. You can compare really any different types of attribution, like first click, linear, time decay. There's lots of different types, and you can compare those. You can do that in Universal Analytics as well, so that's not different. But the data driven piece is what's different here, which is nice. And then conversion paths is kind of like how many touch points did a certain channel have before it converted. So Google and Universal has this as well. It's a much cleaner look here though, but this is a useful tool. So these are my attribution stuff. Again, I don't know why it's under advertising, but it is. And then you get into configure. And this is where you can come in and set up your conversions. So, and more events as well. So you can come in and toggle on and off different conversions depending on what you want to set as a conversion. And then you can also create new events based on events that are already getting pushed in here as well. I'm not going to get into that. It's kind of getting too in the weeds, but a lot of flexibility in what you're capturing in the data that shows up. Great. So I'll pause there 1 more second here, look for other questions. Z asked about the data-driven model. Is it different from the Shapely approach? I'm assuming it's the same data-driven model that they've been using. I can't imagine they've shifted away from that necessarily. So my guess is, I don't have any data to back this up, but my guess is it's going to be similar to what they've had in the past. They just now made it a fundamental part of GA4. What if your website isn't e-commerce? How do you use the info in the monetization? And unless you have, like, if you're an app and you take in-app purchases, or you do e-com, you don't need monetization. And in the example I gave here, I actually deleted that collection out of here. So you can come in here and say, all right, I'm going to look at my collections. I'm going to edit them. And then hopefully I'm doing this right. Yeah, you can come over here and like you'd be able to delete an entire collection if you don't want that monetization. So you can get rid of that. So Sarah, you asked that question. You'd be able to set up your conversions based on different type of events, like form fills, like lead generation kind of form fills, downloading of white papers or PDFs or something. So you can adjust that differently, and that would fall in the conversion bucket. Configuring products for SaaS. If you are capturing your data for an app, that's where it actually is pretty cool. You're going to need to use Google Tag Manager to really push a lot of events based on how users are behaving and actions they're taking. So that gets pretty technical, but you can do a lot of great things for tracking your app inside there for sure. Okay. So there's one question about the tagging. I'm going to walk you through real quick how to actually set up GA4. So I'll walk you through that. And this can be loaded in parallel with Universal Analytics. So Universal Analytics will stay as is. You don't have to touch that. And you can load this separately. And so it's a couple steps to get it set up in GA, but then you'll need to then set your code on the site. So if I come in here and say, I'm going to set up a new test site, I'm not going to tell them about my information here. I'm going to say next. Okay, so now I've hit create. So now you have the ability to say, is this a website I'm going to track? Is it an Android app or is it an iOS app? So for most folks, it's going to be web. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And then I'm just going to simply put in my website address. What's my site name? How do I want it to look in the interface? And then this is these are those events that I was talking about that will track by default. So page views, scrolling, outbound clicks, site search, video enhancements or engagements, and then file downloads. All this will track automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave this as is. And you can toggle these on and off. At first run, you don't have videos or you don't do file downloads. You can turn those off if you want. But then you just hit create stream. Okay, now it's creating this data stream. And now that's basically just like the collection or the connection that's going to be made. And then, so that's all set. Now what you need to do is go and add your tag to your site. So if you're already using the G tag, which is kind of the newer tag, this will basically already just connect to that tag. If you've been using Universal Analytics for a long time, you're going to need to add this new tag on your site. So you either need to get with your developer and ask them to add the tag, or what I would recommend doing, if you don't have Google Tag Manager already loaded, get Google Tag Manager's code added on your site, and then you're just going to connect GA4 through Google Tag Manager. And there's quick instructions on how you do that. You add a tag, and then you add your code, your ID into Tag Manager, and that will then start firing on there. So initially getting this set up, as you can see, I already did the basics. You just got to get the tag on there and off you go. Like, it's not that complicated to get the initial setup going, but it's getting up all the events if you want to track those to make sure that you're getting those set up properly. Okay. Question about GTM being phased out. I have not heard Google Tag Managers being phased out. It's a pretty popular tool. I can't imagine they're going to get rid of that. If they do, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble, and a lot of people will. So hopefully they're not getting rid of that. So I can't imagine they are. I have not heard that. Okay, there's a question about permissioning in UA views. Permissioning still happens, but you don't actually have views anymore. So if you're familiar with how views used to show up over here, so if I were to jump into a Universal Analytics, you can see these views come up, and you can create different views and filter on them and everything. GA4, you can't do that anymore. You just have the property, but you can still set your permissions on the property itself. So you can control the user, what users can see that with this access management here. Setting up through Shopify, you can set it up, but you will have to set it up. Shopify is not ready for it yet. They don't have a quick way, like you could just add the code like they can with Universal. You can't do that. You will have to use Google Tag Manager, and you will have to set up all the GTM tags to fire off purchase events and add to cart events and all that stuff. It's fairly complicated. Sorry, that's not a great answer to hear, but right now, a lot of platforms aren't really ready for GA4, where you can just kind of add a code and have it going. If I had a website, Android app, do you need all to elaborate? Okay, so if you have a website, an Android app, an iOS app, it's all going to be different data streams. So you know how I set up a data stream when I created a new property? You're going to set up separate data streams, and then you're going to implement the code on each of those platforms, but it'll all come into the same property. So you'll then be able to there's ways in your reporting to basically change out your platform if you want to filter out and say, okay, what's my web traffic doing? What's my iOS traffic doing? What's my website doing? But all the data comes into one place, which is great. Okay, is there an easy at-a-glance report that's shareable? Oof, I don't know. I think you're talking about, it's probably, I mean, the best thing, you actually, sorry, you can share that, like your, any sort of dashboard here. So like, let's say I go to the home screen, you could create a nice home screen here, or like create your own collection, your only collection of reports, and then you can share those out. Let me see if I can see that here. Oh, some of the screens do have it. So yes, the answer is yes. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I think I answered most of those. All right, so getting close here. All right, so went through that. Last couple things. Here's things to do now, right? Like Google made the announcement a few weeks ago that they're getting rid of analytics or GA Universal Analytics in July 2023. Feels like we have a year. We really don't, because if you want to be able to do year-over-year comparisons, you have to get it in now, and but for sure by July 1 of this year. So at the very least, go through what I just went through and get the basics set up. But you really need to get your events, your key events like signups, login, form completions, purchases. All that stuff should really be set up now, so you have a long history of data. Google has alluded to the fact that they may actually not only shut off Universal, but stop giving you access to the data completely by the end of 2023, which would really suck. Like I hope they don't do it, but they might. And so get GA4 set up as soon as you can, so you have at least a year's worth of data. And then on your marketing platforms, make sure that you get your UTMs clean, and get work on that now, right? There's no reason not to, because the systems will work the same. Universal Analytics rules will work in the similar way as GA4 rules will work. So you may as well get those set up to work in GA4. And so a couple different tools you can use to help streamline that. At Promo Prep, we've got a quick tool where you can just kind of punch in a URL, select your channel, and it'll help guide you into what source, medium, and campaign name to import. Well, source and medium, your campaign name can change, but source and medium should be something that Google needs in order to push it into that channel. So that's a quick way to do that. I will send you the link to that here. And notice I've got some nice UTMs in that. And then also my friends over at Blue Moon and Merge, they've got this really cool campaign coder. It's called the Universal Campaign Coder, or UCC. It's a really robust way to systematize and really clean up and standardize all of your tags and UTMs and everything across different channels. So if you're running email and display and paid social and all of these different channels, it's really easy if you have a certain campaign name, like for someone to put 2 dashes in something, or put the wrong letter in here, and all of a sudden that campaign name doesn't come through cleanly into GA. And so it's really easy to make a mistake there when you're just using tools like the one we have here, which is kind of more one-off things. This actually lets you store things. You can get your team in there. So it's a really, really cool tool. I'll shoot that link over to you as well, so you can take a look at that. But that's definitely recommend doing something here. You got to really think about how you're using your UTMs there as well. And then finally, a couple of other tools, a couple plugs here. I know you're all a lot of marketers. If you're looking for a planning tool, definitely check out Promo Prep. It's really a marketing calendar built for easy engagement and adoption. It's very kind of visual and intuitive. Hopefully if you need that, check that out. And also we're in the midst of building this marketing inspiration tool. It's basically, we're tracking over 1,000 different brands their emails they're sending out, their SMSs they're sending out, connections to Instagram and TikTok. So a place to kind of get inspiration, kind of see what competitors are doing, whatever. So that's coming soon. So if you want to get information about that, I'm going to shoot over the link to our newsletter so you can sign up for that. And then finally, I'd love to connect with all y'all. So definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to just put a note in there that you saw me on the webinar, and I'd love to connect with you there. So I'll take a second here to see if there's any other questions. Any impact to GA integration with BI tools like Data Studio and Domo? Yes and no. Data Studio does connect to GA4 seamlessly. That's not a problem at all. Something like Domo, it's using a BigQuery connector, which it doesn't necessarily use the API, so it's not going to connect as easily necessarily, but it can be done. So the answer is, depending on the platform, it's definitely possible. So if you need to get your historical data, that's a good place to start, is to get connected to some of these kind of data warehouses where you can actually pull the data in. So you have your old universal information in there, but then you can also kind of somewhat pull in a GA4. But again, like, you're not going to be able to do a good comparison with GA4 versus universal because they're just not going to line up very well. Will this impact pulling information into Data Studio? Okay, so so no, again, it won't. You can connect directly to GA4, but if you're using if you have reports set up in Data Studio with Universal, and then you're connected to GA4, you're going to have to recreate your reports. And I'm definitely in that position. I use Data Studio a lot. It's definitely problematic. So you're going to have to rebuild some stuff. So that's going to be problematic. So cool. Are there SEO impacts? No SEO impacts. This is not going to have any impact on that. This is really just reporting. Universal didn't really have any SEO impacts either. It's really just the way to pull in and track data. So yeah, there really are no SEO implications. Cool. I think I answered most of the questions. If I didn't, you can send them over. But certainly reach out to me. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer anything as they come up. But yeah, good luck, everybody. Thanks so much for joining, and I'll see you.